All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to week 2 of our IEP Support Series. This is the second meeting that we have had, 2 of 6. So after tonight, we will have 4 remaining sessions. This week is all about the IEP. So we are going to be taking that IEP and breaking it down into its individual component pieces, talking about why each piece exists, what it's there for, and why it is important. If you missed last week's and you'd like to go back and learn about how to get to the point where your child can have an IEP, that is on YouTube now. So you can go back and watch week 1 on YouTube. Without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. This is super casual, so please, if you have a question, write it in the chat box. I will be monitoring that, or unmute and chat with us. Let me know if you've got a question. I would be happy to answer it. If I don't know the answer, I'll be very transparent about that, and we'll find the answer and we can get it. All right, if you wanted to, you could have printed out this PowerPoint to take notes on. If you don't have it, it was on the calendar link for tonight. So go back to that calendar link. All right, so what are the parts exactly of an IEP? Why is each piece important? And why is it not a suggestion? All right, so a super brief history of IEP storage and maintenance. Prior to Hurricane Katrina, each school housed their IEPs on an at-school computer. So old school, you had to go log into that particular computer, go to that particular program, and there was no master template for IEPs. Every school district kind of purchased the software that they wanted to use. Then, of course, we had Hurricane Katrina, and we had thousands and thousands of students who were displaced and needing educational services. And the parents would show up to the school and say, my kid is a child with special needs, but I don't know what they get. So we had kids all over the state, and I'm sure outside of the state, and we had no idea how many minutes of special education they were supposed to receive, if they got speech therapy, occupational therapy, etc. And so we realized that we had to have a solution for this problem. And so the state developed C.A.R.E.S. Special Education Reporting is the official acronym. I think it makes more sense to say State Electronic Records, but they don't want to ask me to name stuff. Now, as of last summer, we have E.S.E.R. They did kind of an overhaul on the program and the way that our IEPs are formatted. So you'll notice a little bit of difference now if you have an IEP since last summer. Although that came with a lot of problems. The system is randomly inaccessible. A lot of districts at the beginning of the year had to handwrite their IEPs because they could not get into the C.A.R.E program. They have, as of a few weeks ago anyway, not been able to recover the LEAP Connect data from 2022. The system crashes a whole lot, and unfortunately for my purposes anyway, they don't yet have a blank template for training purposes. So we will be using still the old template, but all of the information that was on the old is on the new, and we'll kind of talk about how that looks different. So what's the IEP exactly? That is your child's individualized education program. That document guides the experience for your child or for any child who has been deemed eligible for special education services in accordance with Bulletin 1508, which is our pupil appraisal handbook. These are the major parts of IEP, and we're going to go through them one at a time. But just for a general overview, first you have the general student information. So that's kind of your at a glance about this particular child. Then you will have an instructional plan, one for each area of need. Then accommodations and modifications, program services, placement, and then if applicable, you can have lots of other attachments, such as the individualized healthcare plan, the assistive technology checklist, behavior intervention plan. All of those additional supports are attached to the back of the IEP. All right, so this is just the general student information page. Again, it does look a little different now with the new I.E.P template, but the information is the same. So at the top, we're just identifying the student and other identifying information such as that individual evaluation or waiver date, the meeting date. The meeting date and the evaluation date are very important because those things expire. So your IEP will expire every year on that meeting date. So if our meeting was today, February 8th, then next year on February 8th, that IEP would expire. As a practical matter, teachers do not like to let their IEPs expire. And so we're usually pretty on top of things and making sure that we get those meetings scheduled with enough buffer time that if something happens and we need to reschedule, we can still be in compliance with our IEP date. And the same is true for our individual evaluation or waiver date. All right here we have a signature part, but this is not what you hear of when you say the signature page. This only records who is present at the meeting. So if the person is at the meeting, they should sign their name to denote that. Something that I do see sometimes when advocating is that this part of the IEP will be pre-filled before the IEP meeting happens. And so there may be people listed here that don't show up to the meeting. So I just make a note of that on my copy, my draft copy of the IEP, and ask that those people please be removed from the sign-in page since they were not present at your child's meeting. All right, this is the general information about the student box. At the very least, it should contain the name of the school, the age and grade of the student, if the student has repeated any grades, and other pertinent information that does not belong anywhere else on the IEP. You'll notice that at the top of each of these sections, there's some smaller type in a different font. That is what the IEP user guide says. So if you were to go to the Louisiana State Department of Education's website, Louisiana Believes, and look up their IEP user form guide, that's what it says there, is write a general description of the student. As a practical matter, the name, age, grade, repeated grades is what usually goes in there. A question about names. So almost 20 years ago, when I started teaching special education, we used people's names. We would say, Howard is a 3rd grade student, blah, blah, blah. Now, most districts have moved to not using names at all. Some use initials and some only use pronouns. So if I had an IEP about myself, it might just say she, blah, 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 or the student, blah, 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 or JD, blah, blah, blah. They say that it is to protect confidentiality. I don't really get that because the student's name is on the top of the form. The whole thing is about the student, so it doesn't make much sense to me. I think maybe what happened is somebody got a little too happy with some copy pasting and got in trouble for it, and now nobody can use names. All right, strengths box. This should include specific skills, including developmental and functional skills, and should also include those skills that are relative strengths. So let's talk about that. Because sometimes what we'll see is, say, reading fluency in the strengths box. And then when we get to the needs box, it says reading fluency. So parents are like, but how can it be a strength and a weakness and a need? That doesn't make sense. It makes sense when you think of it in terms of scores. So when your student, when your child is evaluated, and we have all this great assessment data, maybe your student is weak in reading fluency. Say maybe they're, if we were to put a percentage on it, they're at the 60th percent. But it's a relative strength compared to comprehension, which might be 30%. So just because it's not a strength compared to a typically developing kid or the norm group, it doesn't mean that it's not a strength for your particular child. It might still be something we have to work on, but it also could be a strength. All right, parent concerns box. This, I always say, please fill this out in advance because you'll be sitting in the meeting and all of a sudden we get to this box and then like 10 or 12 people stare at you and say, and what are you concerned about? And I've had the deer in the headlights look from parents, and they just say, I just want my kid to do well. Luckily, if I meet with parents before, I always write this out. I actually make little bullet points next to mine. One size bullet point means this is not negotiable. We are not leaving until we talk about this. And other bullet points, little smaller ones, are like, we would like to address this if it becomes an appropriate time. There is no maximum length for these. So some parents like to type it all out and then email it to the teacher and say, please copy and paste this as written into the IEP. And so you'll notice that those boxes are kind of small. They are kind of small, and if it runs out of space, it just kicks onto the addendum page, which is an additional page at the end. So it's okay if you have a lot of thoughts. The form can accommodate a lot of thoughts. Evaluation, reevaluation results. So that is the evaluation that we did to determine if the child is special education or not special education. So that is what we're talking about here when we're talking about the evaluation date. We also want to identify the exceptionalities. So some students have one. Maybe your student has autism. That's their diagnosis. Sometimes students have more than one. So they might have autism and OHI, other health impairment. So if there's multiple diagnoses of different exceptionalities, we'll put that there. We can also put additional diagnoses such as a reading disability or ADHD, things of that nature. We also want to put a little notation here saying if the student qualifies for related services, and if they don't, something that says the student does not qualify for any related services at this time. Related services being things like health needs, so that maybe they see the nurse, counselor, occupational therapy, speech therapy, adaptive physical education, all of those sorts of things are considered related services. And we need to know right away if this is a child with related services, so we put it in this box. Academic, developmental, and functional needs box. Everything identified in this box should be accompanied by an instructional plan page to address that need area. So for example, if I say the student shows needs in toileting, transitioning from place to place in the building, and reading comprehension, then when I get to the instructional plan pages, then I better have one for toileting, transition within the building, and reading. So whatever I'm noting here, we need to have an instructional plan page to address. So I can't identify a need and then not address it later. Statewide assessment results. This portion obviously only used for kiddos in testing grades, but if we do have a student who is taking the LEAP or the LEAP Connect test, then we will put their current assessment grades in this box. Progress or lack of expected progress in the general education curriculum. This part usually describes the current progress of the student. So what are the grades? What was the progress toward the goals and objectives on the last IEP? What interventions are we using? And we often also will have a comment about AIM, which is accessible educational materials. So if your child is working with materials at a different grade level or a different format, or maybe it's for visually impaired students, a comment about that will happen in this box. All right, this is the second page of the GSI, so the second of two, so don't panic, there's not a whole bunch of these. First box being behavior, and the behavior box should include information about positive as well as negative behaviors. Sometimes I will see this box as NA, and that's just not appropriate. It's good because it is applicable. Everybody has behaviors, whether they're good, bad, or otherwise. We need to identify if the student is participating in PBIS, which, if you don't know, that's positive behavior intervention and support. So a lot of schools have like a monthly PBIS party or celebration or an extra recess, or kids get a popsicle. Is the child participating in that? Have we identified other rewards that the student likes to work for? And any other helpful details. If the student's behavior is always lovely and pleasant and proactive and positive, we're going to write that. If the behavior can impede learning in the classroom, we're going to put that. And then we're going to write about what we've tried as intervention strategies, what we've tried that doesn't work, and then any other information that we might have about this behavior. Limited English proficient box. This is for our English language learners. So if we do have a student who is an English language learner, we want to make sure that in this box, we are identifying their native language and also the language that the family speaks at home. That way, when you go to the meeting and you need an interpreter, that information is already there. Communication needs of the child. This is where we talk about the child's communication needs as far as with their speech therapist, but also in their classroom. So if the student is seeing a speech therapist, the speech therapist will most times log into the E.P program and complete this box from her perspective or his perspective. And then if the student is using an AAC device or a talker, information about that goes here. If they are using sign or cued speech or a PEX system, information about that goes here. So really, what do you need to know really quickly by just reading this box about the student's communication needs? So of course, it's not robust and full, but it does give us a snapshot. The rest of that information will come on an instructional plan page for communication. Instruction in and the use of Braille. So for our students who are learning UEB, which is Unified English Braille, a description of that will go here. Sometimes we have a student who is not yet blind and does not yet need Braille, but it could be determined that that person will use Braille in the future, and so we will start teaching that while the person is still sighted. Assistive technology. So we came up with, the state came up with an assistive technology consideration checklist a number of years ago. And that should be used with every student. So every student should have this checklist performed at their IEP meeting, where we identify areas of the curriculum that the student is having a really hard time accessing. And then we say, what assistive technology have we tried? Or do we need help to identify assistive technology that might help this kid? Special education teachers are not assistive technology professionals. We're familiar with a lot of it. We've used a lot of it, but districts have their own assistive technology specialists that can come in and do an evaluation with your child to see if there is any assistive technology that would help them access learning. AT can be simple, anything from like a specialized pencil grip all the way to your more elaborate AT devices. And we'll take a look at a few of those a little later tonight. The last box on this page is the healthcare needs. So if we have a student who has healthcare needs, then we're definitely going to want to denote that on the IEP. And that can be anything from asthma, diabetes, seizures, other medical diagnoses, ADD, ADHD. It could be the medical diagnosis of autism. If the student requires positioning within a wheelchair or straps to be used, diapering, assistance with meals or feeding tubes, ventilators, any of those kinds of things go on this page. But don't be fooled by thinking, oh, well, my kid's not that needy, or their need is not that intense. If your child takes medication and they could have some sort of adverse side effect while at school, we need to know that too. So please make sure that you are disclosing that information. For example, I once had a student whose medication prevented him from sweating. We live in Louisiana. You have to be able to sweat, right? So on his healthcare plan, it talked about the fact that he could not sweat. And then it laid out a chart for me. So if it's this many degrees, he can spend this many minutes outside, this many degrees, this many minutes, and then gave me the early warning signs that he was getting too hot. So his little ears turned pink. We had to go inside right away because I needed to know, even though he didn't take the medication at school, I needed to keep him safe. And the last thing on this box are the educational needs, like tiny boxes at the bottom. They are academic, cognitive, behavior, communication, motor, self-help, and social. So if I check one of these boxes, I have to match it with an instructional plan page. For example, if my student is working on toileting, that might be considered a self-help goal. And so I would just check off self-help here, and then I would have a self-help instructional plan page for toileting. If I click social, same thing. I have to have a social instructional plan page. So whatever checked here has to match with an instructional plan page. All right, brain check. Is anybody's brain melting? I'm assuming you're doing okay. I cannot see anyone. So I'm hoping that you're all there. All right, Jamie says she's doing great. Are there any questions about the general student information part of the IEP before we move on to instructional plan pages? All right, Mary says she's good. Is it Dejun? Is all good? All right. Y'all, please stop me if you have questions, because I'll just keep on rolling and then people will be lost. And I do not want people to be lost. We are here to be found and we are here to be informed. All right, next part, instructional plan pages. And again, every area of need that we have identified thus far in this document needs to have an instructional plan page. So we're going to take a look at it little piece by little piece. The first part is the educational need area. So we are going to identify the need as either being academic cognitive or academic enrichment, which could include behavior, communication, motor, self-help, or social needs. And then there's a content area section where I can write in a little more information. So for example, if I chose academic cognitive as my drop-down piece, my content area might be reading comprehension, or math fluency, or map skills, whatever that more specific descriptor could be. If I'm working on behavior, maybe my content area is impulse control. If it's for communication, maybe it's voice or articulation. So we get a little more specific here in the content area place. All right, this next section is mandatory per IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It's one of the few things on our IEP that is mandated by IDEA. And it is not where we want the kid to be. That comes later. This is the snapshot of right now. So how is this student performing in this need area? So let's go with reading fluency. I want to know at what grade level the student can read. How many words per minute can he read correctly? Is he reading 3-letter words like consonant, vowel, consonant, CVC words? Are we doing blends or digraphs? So all of that stuff is very important to get a specific snapshot of the child, so I know where we can go. I can't know where we can go if I don't know what the kid can do. So this should be robust. It should include data. It can even include which kinds of assessments were used to best show that student's ability levels. So if one teacher is writing everything using Dibbles testing, and then I go to a different school and everybody's doing DRA testing, I'm maybe not comparing apples to apples. I want to be really clear here about the scores that I have for this student and where they came from, how I got them. That leads us to our academic or functional goal. And so this is what I want to achieve during the course of the whole entire year. And it should be fairly broad. And I'll give an example. And then we'll talk about objectives in just a few moments. So a goal could be, say for reading, that I want the student to be able to read on level text, meaning on their actual level that they can read, on level text, to be able to answer comprehension questions and make inferences. And I want the student to be able to read with 98% accuracy. Okay, that's a big goal. I can take that big goal and I can pull the threads apart of that goal. So for my objectives, I would have an objective for being able to fluently read that passage with 98% accuracy. I would have a goal for comprehension, basic comprehension questions, and I would have a goal for making inferences, because those are the things I included in my big goal. So for my objectives, those are like the little stepping stones, the little pieces on how I'm going to get to the goal. Now, that's not how they're always written. Some districts will take that big goal and they will just copy paste it. I call that the lazy way. Copy paste, copy paste, copy paste into the objectives, with each one getting a little more difficult as the year goes on. For example, the student will read an on-level reading passage, answer comprehension questions, make inferences, and read with 98% accuracy. So that's the beginning of it. That's the beginning of all of them. And it's with 40% by the end of the first 9 weeks, and 60% by the end of the second 9 weeks, and 80% by the end of the third 9 weeks, and 90% by the end of the IEP year. And that just really burned me, because then we're not necessarily taking data on the individual threads of that goal. So what if the kid never gets there? Then what? I don't know what to work on as the next teacher getting this IEP, because there's no data specifically for comprehension, for making inferences, for reading fluency, trying to get to 98% accuracy with the reading out loud. So I really like to see the objectives being the stepping stones to get to the goal, and not just the goal copy pasted over and over. Some districts will fight tooth and nail. They're like, nope, that's how we do it, and that's how we do it. In which case, then I say, okay, well, then I want another instructional plan page for fluency, and another one for comprehension, and another one for making inferences, because otherwise, how do I know what the student can do? All right, method of measurement. As you can see, there are a lot of different ways that we can measure progress. And just like I stated before, you want to be able to compare apples to apples. So we're going to identify a method of measurement. That way, if I'm measuring it, and then she goes down the hall to another teacher, they're measuring it the same way, everybody's on the same page, measuring the same thing in the same fashion. So we are going to choose one main method of measurement. And then in the second little place, I can write in more. So say I'm looking at behavior, and my behavior that I want is I'm trying to reduce the child eloping from the room or running away from the room. There are some of these ways that we can measure that just don't make sense for elopement, like a rubric. That's not going to make any sense. Video evidence, not trying to video kids running away, right? That's not safe and it's not ethical. But I'm probably going to use a chart. So my main method of measurement would be charting, but then I might want some additional information. So I might, for the write-in, want to add observational data. So I can have a little more anecdotal information about this, or a documentation log. So they have additional methods of measurement just so you can kind of really try to get the whole picture of what the student can do. All right, objectives we talked about. Objectives are only required for students under the age of 5, and for students that are on the LEAP Connect track. So if yours is a student on LEAP Connect, congratulations, you will get objectives. If your student is not on the LEAP Connect track, you might have to fight for objectives for your kid. And then the personnel responsible. So is it the special education teacher's job to make sure this happens, the speech teacher, the APE teacher, regular ed teacher, other related service providers? We would write those in. Sometimes parishes will put para-educator if they are working one-on-one with a kid on a specific goal or objective. The two boxes that I see that are most highly contentious, I guess, are the parent box and the student box. Some districts say, check those boxes. That parent is an important part of this IEP team. They are working every day with their child at home. And they are responsible for helping to implement this goal. And some districts say, we cannot be responsible for what the parents do when they're, not on the school grounds. Do not check the parent box because we can't make sure that they're actually going to be helping us. So really, districts feel very strongly one way or the other typically. And then the same goes with the student box. Some districts say this student is a part of their IEP. Obviously, it's all about them. They're the ones working hard to learn this. They're the ones making the progress. They should be checked. And then other districts say that person is under 18. They can't be responsible for legal decisions. They can't be checked on this document. Again, just depends on your district. And we want to make sure that we are writing goals the smart way. So they should be specific, able to be measured, attainable, relevant, and time-based. And what I mean by these things is specific. So if I go in and then 10 other teachers behind me come in and read the same IEP, we have the same exact understanding of what the student should be learning. Measurable. So I don't want to use language like the student will improve, blah, blah, blah. By what? And how are we measuring that? So I want to make sure I'm giving specific data. So we'll be able to read on-level passages with 98% accuracy. That is specific, and I can measure that by counting how they're reading. Attainable. This is a big one. I had an IEP cross my desk the other day. A client wanted me to review the child's IEP, and most of his baseline data, what he can do right now, was 0%. And all of the goals were 80% by the end of the IEP year. So to get a student from 0%, not doing this thing at all the way to 80%, I really had to question, is that something that is attainable for this student? Are they at 0% because they've never seen it before, but it's going to be introduced and we anticipate the student being able to do this? Or is this something that we've been working on for a while and we're not getting anywhere, even though we've been plugging away at it for a while now? So I can't make that call on my own. That's obviously something that I would need more input on, but definitely was a red flag for me. Relevant. Let me talk about relevant in just a moment when we get to another slide. And then time-based, all of our IEPs are time-bound because they are written for one IEP year. So you don't have to worry about the T. The T is built in for you. All right, so this is the one I wanted to talk about in just a moment, relevant. So an additional thought about goals and objectives are that goals are written on grade level of the student, but the objectives should meet the student where he or she is functioning. So let's talk about this a little bit and what it kind of looks like in Louisiana. A few years ago, the state kind of made this blanket decision that all students' goals had to be written on grade level, which sounds good. If you have kiddos that have, small gaps to close, maybe that is attainable. Maybe that is relevant. But what about my student who is, say, in 10th grade and reading on a second grade level? How on earth am I going to get that to write a goal for 10th grade reading, but they're on a second grade level? That doesn't make sense. One really great thing, and mark your calendar because I don't get to say that very often. One really great thing Louisiana did is we have vertically aligned our standards, meaning that we have a standard for each thing we want a student to know, and that standard starts in kindergarten and goes all the way. They don't always correlate. Like sometimes you'll get to a specific standard and it says this should have been met in 3rd grade, and so it doesn't continue anymore. But I can go down to 3rd grade and I can look and see what that is. So same thing for my kiddo who's in 10th grade but reading on a 2nd grade level, I would go and see what should a 10th grader be able to do. And maybe it is comparing and contrasting different essays on the historical perspective of different events. That sounds pretty 10th grade. My kid can't do that. So I'm going to go down to 9th grade. Is there something that he can do there? Nope. 8th grade, 7th, 6th, 5th. I go all the way back down that vertical alignment until I find something that is relevant. So don't let the school tell you, oh, everything has to be on grade level. We have to start to meet the needs of the actual students. I hope that makes sense. That I'm not making any sense. Try to avoid the lazy objectives, those copy-paste jobs. I know some districts, though, they will fight you all the way to the ground with that. And it's so frustrating. I have not yet been able to get a decent answer as to why they insist on doing it that way. But at that point, you just ask for more instructional plan pages to meet the needs of your child. I'm often asked this: what is the number? How many goals and objectives should my kid have? I don't know is the answer to that one. Really depends on your student. So if one student might have 3 goals and they each have 3 objectives, so that's 9. But another kid might have 7 different goals and only 1 or 2 objectives per goal. So it really, really depends on your kid. If your student needs help in reading, they might have a goal or 2 with a couple of objectives for reading. If they receive speech therapy, the speech therapist will have her own goals and objectives. Occupational therapy, same. Physical therapy, same. Adapted PE, same. Counseling, same. So it really, really does depend on your particular kiddo. All right, brain check. After this, we're going to move to our accommodations and modifications. All right. If I'm not hearing anything, I'm going to assume you guys are good to go. All right, before we start to look at the individual offerings for accommodations and modifications, they are first. An accommodation helps students learn the same materials and meet the same expectations as their classmates, which is excellent. That's great. It changes how the student accesses the curriculum. So it doesn't change what I want them to know. It just changes how they're going to access that. So I'll point some of those out along the way. A modification changes what the student is taught or what that student is expected to learn. And often those guys are taking alternate assessments or they're using alternate texts. But both should help the children access an education. Both are delivered by the teacher or whoever was on the team working with the kiddo. And both are IEP decisions that need to be made at the IEP meeting. Ethel, I saw that you had a hand raised. Did you have a question?
No, ma'am. I realized it and I seen what I was looking for.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so a little note about this. I do this in person from 11:30 to 1 o'clock at Red Stick C.A.R.E.S. And one of the moms here today, her mind was blown at all of the accommodations and modifications. She said she had never seen all of these choices ever. And I said, well, that's because when the person prints the IEP, they can print it full list of accommodations and modifications. They can pre-check the boxes and just print the checked accommodations and modifications. So if you are seeing things here tonight that you have never seen before, then maybe that your IEP was printed with only the checked accommodations and modifications in the printout. All right, so we're going to look a little closer. There are pages and pages and pages of these. We can't possibly go through every single one. So I've just kind of highlighted a few as we go along. But if there's one that you want to know more about, please, 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 please raise a hand, unmute, put your video on, write it in the chat box, whatever you need to do to get my attention, because I just want to make sure that you leave with all the information tonight. All right. On the new chart, the new E.S.E.R version, it looks a little different. First off, they don't have these things in purple here denoting the different kinds of accommodations. That is gone. And then something else that's gone are that some of the accommodations and modifications are no longer offered. And we'll talk about a few of those as well. The first kind of accommodations we'll talk about are presentation accommodations. So this is how the curriculum is being presented to the child. So we'll take a look at a few of these. All right, read aloud. This is always highly contentious because there are qualification rules to read aloud. Two different kinds of rules, I'll tell you about both. The first one for having materials read to a student is that in order to qualify for having read aloud to you, second one, but in order to have anything read aloud to you, the student has to be functioning 2 or more grade levels below their current grade. So if my 6th grader is reading on a beginning 5th level or into 4th level, she wouldn't qualify. She has to be 2 or more grade levels below to have content read aloud. Now, to have reading comprehension read aloud, that is a different qualifier. For that one, it's basically if the kid can decode letters, they do not get read aloud for reading comprehension. There are several screeners that the state can use or have used to make that decision kid per kid, but it is really hard to get the read aloud for reading comprehension. All right, let's talk a little bit more about text-to-speech. Text-to-speech is what your phone does when you say, hey, Siri. I don't have Siri. I don't want my phone to go off. You know, what is the average length of a whale? You know, and it reads it out loud to you. So it is a computerized voice. A lot of times kids will learn how to use that function on their computer or their iPad or whatever device they have, where they can click the button and it will read to them. And if they need it read again, there's a button they can click, it'll read it again. Sometimes they can slow the speech down. Sometimes they can speed the speech up. Sometimes they can choose the voice that they want it read to them. So maybe it's an Australian surfer guy reading or a British woman reading. So some of the programs have options. Some kids, though, need a human reader. We definitely know that for some kids, text-to-speech, that automated robotic voice, is like, no, thank you. I've definitely had some kids that I don't think they were trying to smash the computer, but they definitely wanted to get away from the computer because that text-to-speech voice is just it's just too grating to them. So those kinds of students need a human reader. What Louisiana has done in the last year is decided that everyone's standardized testing experience should look the same. So everyone should get text-to-speech for read aloud, no more human readers. Which is really unfortunate because for some kiddos that get human reader, they also get things like redirect to the test or rephrase test questions. Of course, we can't rephrase the LEAP test, but if it was a human reader, I could at least slow down. I could pause. I could give the kid, time to think. I could do some of the other accommodations that are allowed on the LEAP test. So right now, that is not an option to check. For my teachers out there, I've been working with one of the districts fairly close to Baton Rouge, not EBR, and they are using the unique accommodations form to specifically request human reader for the LEAP test. So if yours is a child who needs a human reader, teachers, if your students need a human reader, I don't yet know if they have been successful with that unique accommodations form. I'll find out on Friday. I'll let y'all know. But let's give it a try. Kurzweil is an overlay program that you upload on your computers, and it does the thing that I was talking about with the reading out loud. So the kid can say, faster, slower, read it again. It's a good program. Lots of districts have access to that. Right? A lot of our kids need modify, repeat, model directions. Sometimes I need modified, repeated, or model directions. But if we're not checking it on the IEP, then that means that a teacher, who I'm sure means very well, says, well, I told him what to do. Well, but he didn't do it. Yeah, but I told him. So we need to be very mindful that we are telling the student what to do in a way that they can access. So I might have to modify or change up the way I'm giving that direction. I might have to repeat it several times, break it down into steps and repeat it, or I might have to model it where I'm actually physically showing the student what I want them to do. I see that one a lot. I think it's a really important one for most kids. Multiple choice spelling tests or a shortened spelling list. I like this one because it gives some options. Maybe I want the student to be able to spell all the same words as their peers because they can do that. They can learn that, but they can't write it. That's fine. How many of us are handwriting things these days anyway, right? A lot of us do all things by computer or text messages. So we need to be able to identify the right word, but not necessarily handwrite it. So a multiple choice spelling test will have like 3 different versions of the word, and you choose the one that is spelled correctly. Shortened spelling list is more of a modification. That means that instead of learning the 25 word list, maybe I want you to be able to learn 10 or 5. Really just depends on the student's need. I have one student who is doing half. So they're doing 5 instead of the class is doing 10. And then, but his other 5 words, because he still gets 10 words, the other 5 words are his personal functioning level. So half of his words are on the 5th grade level, and the other half of his words are on about a 2nd grade level. That way he's being exposed to and he's learning the grade level stuff, but he's also working on his level to learn some of those skills as well. All right, any questions about the ones on this page? Nandy says you have that one checked off for sure. I'm assuming you mean modify, repeat model directions.
Yes, that one.
Yeah. I mean, I need that one, y'all. Like,
me too. I'm the person that like has to stare at the person for 3 or 4 times, like, what?
yes, yes. And by the end of the week, I'm like, could you write it down or something? Like, just can't.
I know. I'm so terrible.
All right, y'all. Let me know if you have any questions on that one, on this collection. All right, next page. We're still in presentation accommodations, so providing accommodations or modifications to the way the student interacts with that curriculum. Talk about a few of these. We've got an FM system. So this is for our students who are hearing impaired or hard of hearing. The teacher wears a little microphone around her neck. The student wears a receiver, or sometimes it goes straight to their hearing aid. So it is kind of as if you are speaking directly into that person's ear. Some of our districts are super proactive at making sure kids have that attention parish. My experience there has been, if they think you get it, you get it. And it's been wonderful. Other parishes, more reticent. The reason why they're a little more hesitant is that if they mark any of these things on the IEP, they have to pay for that technology. They have to pay for that thing. So they want to make darn sure that if they are checking off that your kid needs an FM system and they're about to pay a bunch of money for it, that it's actually something your kid needs. Okay. Unified English Braille. So for our students who are or could become visually impaired, we might want to start teaching some Braille skills. Large print. For our students who are visually impaired or need large print, we want to make sure that we're increasing the white space. The document is more readable because the white space provides such a contrast to the print. We're going to remove all the graphics that do not convey useful information to the reader. I know that our teachers who teach littles, we like color and fun and shapes and characters, and you know, it's super cutesy. Take all that stuff off for our kids who are visually impaired. And then we're also going to avoid all caps, and we're going to avoid bold because those things can make a document more difficult to read. So lots of things that we can do to support all sorts of different learning needs. All right, any other questions about the ones on this page? All right, a few more presentation accommodations. Sorry, my cat just jumped on the computer and turned off the monitor. All right, we're back. Provide assistance, cues, or prompts for transitions between activities. Some of our students, they do not like change. If they are working on something, even though they may not like that thing, they don't like change even more than they don't like that thing. So we want to make sure that we are giving assistance for that. Whether it looks like At 3 minutes, I'm going to say, okay, 3 minutes until we line up. Okay, 1 minute until we line up, and then going and giving a visual cue that the student can actually see. All right, time to line up. Transition support can look like a whole bunch of different things. So we want to make sure that if our kid is melting down or not being successful during transitions, that we are providing some assistance for that. Task analysis, I do these all the time for my kids that work at our nonprofit. I have them for how to clean a bathroom, how to take out the trash, how to, they are doing some recipes. So right now we have one for how to make cake balls. This is just a little example on how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So it's basically a task that you want your student to learn, but you really have to break it down and work on the individual pieces first, and then link all of those individual pieces together. Because if I tried to teach the whole thing at one time, it would be too much information. But for our young man who is learning how to take all the trash out in the building, we've got several supports for him. So we wrote a task analysis where first there's a picture of the garbage can. So you have to go to the garbage can. Then there's a picture of the bag removed from the can and tied up. Then the next picture is a picture of a can with just the empty liner. And then the next picture is the lid put back on the can. And then the next picture is of the bagged garbage on his little cart. And the next picture is the cart next to the dumpster. And the next, so you get the idea. So whatever we're wanting our kid to learn, this is more for our functional and developmental skills more than for our academic skills. That's considered scaffolding, and it's something a little different. But for any of our developmental or functional skills, we can break these tasks that we want our kid to know into a task analysis. This one uses words, but the one I just described was all pictures. Just depends on our kid. All right, any other ones here? I often see provide a daily assignment list. I often see provide homework lists. Sometimes I see simplify test wording. All right. Response accommodations. This provides access, accommodates or changes, modifies the way the students respond to the curriculum. So the ones before were how are they receiving it? Now these are how are they giving back to us? Couple of examples, we've got PECS, Picture Exchange Communication System. I'm a big old believer in PECS. I've had lots of kids that use this for making choices. So what do you want for snack? And you have a picture of goldfish, or you have a picture of halved grapes, or you have a picture of whatever the thing is. And so the student can make a choice. People in general feel a little more at ease, a little calmer, a little happier if they get to choose their own things sometimes. So giving kids choice is very, very important. You know, as adults, we probably make 1,000 or more choices every day. And a lot of them we don't even think about. So we need to start that early. You can see that it's picture-based. The one on the right is, I could cut those PECs out to not even have the words on them. But if I do have a student who is learning words, then I can use the one on the left that has the words built into the pictures. The one on the left is for an AAC device, so a talker. So this kid can push the I want button and then cake. I want cake, and then press the little speech button, and the program will read out, I want cake. And so the student can be vocal, even if it's not with their own voices. Their AAC is their voice, and can request things. I want a hat. I want to play with the sand. And so we can help students be able to communicate their needs and wants that way. This is an example of a head mouse. Only had one student ever use one. It's pretty impressive. It's for our students who have limited control of their arms or hands, or maybe even no movement in arms and hands. And so they operate their computer with their heads. Slant board, this is a super easy occupational therapy tool. used for helping students with writing. There's something about the slant that takes certain pressures off of the arm, wrist, and hands that for some students makes all the difference in the world. If you think your kid might benefit from a slant board, get a 3-ring binder and take the papers out. That's about the slant of a slant board. And then you can give it a try, and maybe it makes a difference, and that's awesome. And maybe it doesn't. And if it doesn't, you haven't lost anything. Oh, Mandy has a slant board. I love them. Easy to use. Kids like them. It's good stuff. All right. Any questions about any of these? Oh, good. Mandy shared that they say she does well with her slant board. Let's talk for a second about calculators, which is on here. Man, this one is kind of the bane of my existence, because we'll check calculators, and then inevitably at some point, some well-meaning, I'm sure, teacher will say, well, I want to see how you do without the calculator. You're not getting the calculator for this test. And they fail. That's not okay. If calculator is checked, calculator is checked. Even on a fluency test, if calculator is checked, calculator is checked. It is not up to an individual teacher to unilaterally make the decision to take that away. If we want to take it away, if we want to try to fade that accommodation, that's fine. We're going to have an IEP team meeting about it, and we're going to decide on a timeline that would best fit our kids' needs. So if it says it on the IEP, it's not at the whim or the decision of anybody else. That's it. The decision has been made. All right, a few more response accommodations. A simple one that I say all the time, this is like the most Googleable accommodation there is adapted paper. So you can see on the examples here, they have different ways of writing the paper or coloring the paper that will help the child to space and size their writing. A lot of our kids have difficulty. When we start off writing, our letters are 4 or 5 inches tall, and they're big, and they're not very pretty. But as we get older and we develop, our writing gets smaller and smaller until eventually most people are writing on a wide ruled or a college ruled notebook paper. But for some of our kiddos, that's not possible yet. So we can provide all kinds of, seriously, Google it, adapted paper, and you can print out as much as you want of it. And it just helps kids stay within the margins, because that yellow, that red is very visual. Eye gaze system, so the little device at the bottom is trained on the person's eyeballs, and it can tell where the eyeballs are looking. And so there are different ways that the user might choose a specific thing on the screen. Sometimes it's a double blink. Sometimes they have like a sip or puff and suck straw sometimes to choose. But it's all based on what body parts does the person have control over independently. And we want to make use of those body parts. And sometimes it's the eyes. Right. Student writes on test. I don't know how old all of you guys are, but I know that I had the joy of Scantrons in college, where you have to fill in the little marks, the little bubble boxes. For my own personal kiddo, when they started using those, I think she was maybe in 2nd grade, her grades tanked. And we were like, what is happening? We were studying, we were doing all this. And I noticed that on the test, when she was showing her work, she was getting things right. But then when she transferred it to the Scantron, it wasn't transferring. Like, she wasn't transferring number 6 to the number 6, number 7 to the number 7. So she'd end up with too many things bubbled in, or not enough things bubbled in. And it was ruining her grade. And so the accommodation that we came up with was that she was going to write on the test, and she was also going to mark the Scantron sheet. And so whatever she got wrong on the Scantron sheet, the teacher would go back and check on the test. And if she got it right when she wrote on the test, then she would get the point. So we started that in 2nd grade. And I think by 4th grade, we were just on Scantrons. She had grown out of the need to write on the test. So keep that in mind for when somebody says, well, we don't want, them to have graduate and not be able to do this or that. Okay, but it doesn't mean they don't need it now, and we can't fade that support over time as the student is experiencing success. All right, any other questions about these? Let me shut the door, guys. My kids are coming home and they are not quiet people. Sorry about that. So on this one, I often see copy of notes. So if our student is, so my own child got this, she has ADD, ADHD. And so to look at the board and then look at her paper and find where she needs to write and doing that over and over and over again, she's missing things in translation. She's not getting the notes down, they're incomplete. She copies letter by letter, not even phrase by phrase or sentence by sentence. So that's a lot of room for error and mistakes, a lot of room for incorrect notes. So that's far point copying, where it's far away and you have to come and write it down on your notebook. So we started with copy of the notes. And so she would have a copy of the note and she would have a highlighter. And as the teacher presented the information, she would highlight the information being presented in that moment. From there, we went to highlighting with annotations. So she would highlight where the teacher is and then add some additional information. Then from there, we went to near point copying. So she had her copy of the notes and she had her notebook right next to each other, copying from there. And now we are partially near point copying and partially far point copying, kind of depending on how quickly the class is going. So she gets that copy to copy directly from, but she's moving more into the far point copying. So she's in 6th grade. I feel really good about where we are with this accommodation. Hopefully we're on the right track for eliminating the copy of the notes altogether, so she can do that independently. Another one I see a lot is reduced answer choices on multiple choice tests. So instead of A, B, C, D, it's just A, B, C. And then planners or graphic organizers, I see that one a lot with kids as well for organizational needs. Timing and scheduling. So these accommodations accommodate or modify the timing in which the student responds to the curriculum. So of course we have extended time, increase the amount of time allowed to complete assignments and tests. That one's, I see that all the time. Sometimes the school, will say, oh, it's time and a half. Some schools say, well, as long as they're continuously working and not like stopping and goofing off and playing and then wanting to come back, then that's fine as well. Really, we want to be able to have the student complete the assignment, complete the test, so that we can say that we are accurately measuring their capability to do the skill and not just measuring if they can do things really quickly. See prior notice of tests pretty often, especially for our kids who don't deal well with change, don't deal well with the change in routine, need to be able to anticipate what's going to happen. Our kids with anxiety issues, our kids who that change, if they walk in, it was like pop test day, might not do well with that. We need to go ahead and give prior notice of tests. Allow breaks during work periods between tasks and during testing. So my first 5 years teaching was middle school. I had middle schoolers who were emotionally disturbed. It was awesome and I loved it. Every day was wild. But a lot of my kids had this, but they wouldn't want to take it. No, leave me alone. I just want to finish. I just want to finish. And so I got to the point where I would take away their assignment or their paper, whatever they were doing, and say, just do me a favor, just go walk and get some water. And they'd walk and they'd get their water and they'd come back, and then they would do, they would finish the test or the assignment, whatever it is. And over time, they understood like taking that little mental brain break was sometimes really beneficial to them. And so then they started doing it on their own. But sometimes we kind of have to prove to our kids like, no, you really need this. Let's try. And as a parent, as a teacher, you want to have that kind of rapport built to where your kid's going to trust, when you're saying, please just give it a try, they'll just give it a try. Yeah, Mandy says her daughter has this. Uses it to nap sometimes. Sometimes a snack will help. And yeah, hopefully one day she won't need to. But right now she does, and that's where we are. All right, other questions about these? Last little set of accommodations and modifications are our setting. So where the instruction is taking place. Of course, it could be individual. It could be individual for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it is a one-on-one test because of behavior. Sometimes it's because of modified content. My absolute most favorite individual testing circumstance that I had was a kiddo who just could not help himself. When the test was read aloud, he would respond. I'm talking, and then he talked. Like, that was conversational. We had worked on that for a really long time. I talk, you talk, I talk, you talk. But I couldn't make him not do it during testing. So I would read the question and then read the answer choices, and he would shout out, A, the answer is A. And he'd write it down, and everybody else would write it down. And I'm like, oh my gosh, guys, like, I don't know if it's A, it could be C. And so, bless his heart, he had to have individual testing. Oh, maybe sent up a little smiling, laughing face. I've never seen that before. That's cool. Yeah, I loved that. I loved that guy. He was great. Another one, obviously pretty common right underneath it, is that small group testing. Just to note, small group is 8 or fewer kids. So after we're busting at the seams with 10, 12, 15 kids, that is no longer small group testing. Assign peer tutors, work buddies, note takers. Sometimes kids learn better from other kids. Sometimes there's only one of me and there's 20 of them, and I can't do all the things. So if I can have a kid that helps get materials and make sure that their buddy has their materials, that's awesome. And that's something that's good for both the receiver and the giver. All right, any questions about these? Is the peer buddy someone only in the child's class? Can you tell me a little more about that?
Yeah, sorry. I don't feel weird and I'm losing my voice, but I was trying to type it. But so at my son's school, they do have like buddies, but the buddies are just regular ed classes. But what if your kid does better with like an ongoing buddy? And I don't even know, like, I guess my question is what would be the extent of that, or is that something to request if my child doesn't have one?
I would think it would depend on the other kids in the class.
Okay.
For example, in some classes, there might be phenomenal peers that would do really well at being a buddy. They wouldn't take over. Like some of our kids they go way overboard with the mama hen stuff, and like they don't always make the best buddies because they're just doing all the stuff for the kid instead of just kind of guiding and helping. So it's really, I think, an individualized kind of where the circumstance is kind of thing.
Okay.
One thing to remember is that just because something could be helpful in one situation, it might not be helpful in others, and that's okay too. So we could check off assign peer tutors, work buddies, note takers, and then in the comments boxes below, we can write in some more information. So like, they wouldn't put a kid's name specifically in there, but if there are certain subjects where it's really helpful, you could write that.
Okay.
Mandy, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm following along on my IEP, and I don't see anywhere on there where it says setting considerations.
Do you have an old form or a new form?
It's pretty new. It's the one we just went over like in December.
Okay. So they may have just not printed that part.
Okay.
Or on the new forms, the new way that they're denoting the different accommodations is different. I have noticed they're not in the same order either, which is blowing my mind because for 17 years, this has been the order and now it's different. And so I'm like, I know it's here somewhere. We got to find it. But people have been pretty good about giving us grades and like looking for things. But you're right. I don't think they call them that anymore.
Oh, I thought maybe it was because she was only in kindergarten. Maybe they just didn't think it was pertinent right now.
It could be that it's just not checked. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's probably the likelihood of the answer, because there is still a settings consideration section.
Okay. Okay. Maybe when she gets older then. Because she's only in kindergarten.
Oh, she's still a little guy or girl.
Yeah, she's little.
Nice. Let's see. We've got some comments in the box. What I find some forget about is the other block, which can be something that is not listed as any of the pre-existing options. Absolutely. Yeah. So she's talking about down here where it says other. You can write in additional things. So if something works for your kiddo and it's not one of the check boxes, write it in.
Okay.
This box is for classroom only, not for LEAP testing. If you need an additional or a unique accommodation for testing purposes, it goes in the second one. And you have to do a form and you have to, send it to the Department of Ed, and then they make a decision as to whether or not it can be used. Oh, use it for homeschool communication. Yeah, that's a good way to use that.
I see now that it says revised 2019. So I guess this is not the newest form.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so then they just did the print the ones that your kid gets, and they didn't print the others.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
It's kind of a sneaky way to just, I think, not give parents options sometimes. It bothers me when you don't get the whole list.
Yeah, I keep getting warned about that. Sneakiness.
Yep. And if I could make this suggestion as well, at the next IEP meeting, bring the one that you have now and do a side-by-side comparison to make sure that you're not losing any minutes, any services, any accommodations. And if they want to take something away, that's okay. Show me the data to support why you're taking it away. Did you do an intervention and she doesn't need this anymore? And so you feel confident that she'll still be successful? If so, great. Take it away. But sometimes things will just disappear from one IEP to another.
Yeah, that's something that did come up because I was warned about missing minutes, and we did discuss that. And luckily with her, there's not. So we did go over that. But I will definitely be more cautious of looking, for future IEPs.
Yeah. When I advocate with the family, I always bring my old copy of that IEP so I can do a side-by-side.
Yeah.
And sometimes it really is an honest mistake, y'all. I was a public school teacher for 10 years. I get it. You are overwhelmed and overworked. There's not enough hours in the day to do all the things you have to do. And so it's just, it really is a very, just an accident, a mistake, an oversight. So a lot of times I'll say, hey, this wasn't checked in this new one. Did we phase that one out? And then they'll say, oh God, we need to check that. And then we move on. It's fine. All right, so how do we choose accommodations and modifications for our kiddo? We are going to keep in mind that certain ones you have to qualify for it. So like read aloud, you have to qualify to have that read aloud. You have to qualify for certain assistive technologies. If somebody wants to add or remove an accommodation or modification, you should have some data to support that decision. So if you're, as the parent, asking for an accommodation and the school says, well, we're not gonna do that. That hasn't been tried. You can definitely ask for a trial intervention period. A couple of weeks where we try it and the teacher takes data, and then we can make a decision based on facts rather than based on guessing. So there's no right or wrong accommodations mods. It all depends on the needs of your individual child. But you can definitely ask for an intervention or a trial period and to collect data. And the same if we want to take off an accommodation. Show me the proof. Show me the proof that my kid can do this without this accommodation, and I'll be happy to let it go. All right, how are your brains? And Dejan, you're absolutely correct. You can ask for them to send you the IEP ahead of time, so you have your own time at home, privately. You can read through, you can compare and contrast, you make notes on it. If there's something you don't understand, annotate, write your questions down on it. Definitely, I always ask for a draft copy of the IEP about a week in advance. All right. All right, moving to the last couple of pages here. I'm trying to keep an eye on the time. This afternoon's went over by about 4 minutes. I'm going to try to keep us on time, y'all. I know it's dinner time. So on this program services pages, this first section is all about the LEAP testing. So kiddos in grades 3 through 12, we need to mark something here. Sometimes it's the LEAP Connect test. Sometimes it's the regular LEAP test. Sometimes it's no test for our kindergartner. For Mandy's kindergartner, no testing. So we have to denote that there. Act 833, this is for our high schoolers. So Act 833, or the April Dunn Act, as it's sometimes called, also gives the students an option for graduation track. So with our high school classes, we have end of course tests that you have to pass to be able to get the credit, the Carnegie unit for that class. But for some kids, say passing geometry, they cannot. They have tried, they take it again, they tried again, they cannot pass geometry. Well, we don't want to keep a kid from graduating because they can't pass a class. And so what will be done there, we'll look at past performance, we'll look at past LEAP scores, and we'll make a decision as to whether this child is or is not eligible for April Dunn. If they are eligible for April Dunn, then we can denote that, and we can give them an alternative path to graduation with a diploma, rather than letting that one class ruin their chances. So start talking about this in 7th and 8th grade. Special transportation, this is the special education bus typically. So if it's no, it's no. If it's yes, then we have to describe why. So is it because the child uses a wheelchair and needs a lift? Is it because of behavioral assistance needed? Is it because of medical health needs? So whatever the yes is, we need to make sure that we're writing that in so that we can match the support with the transportation with the kid's need. All right, this box and the one below it. So regular classes at the top, and then activities with non-disabled peers at the bottom. If our kiddo is participating in the classes or in the activities, we put a little check in the box. Then whatever we're not checking, we have to write why we're not checking them. So for an example, I had a student, she could not have meals with her non-disabled peers. She was on a special diet for health needs, but she was a food seeker. So anything edible that she could get her hands on went into her mouth, and we had to stop her. And we had a protocol, and we had to scoop it out of her mouth, and it was awful. And it was just absolutely miserable for this kid to try to sit in the cafeteria with all these people eating all this different stuff, and she's highly food seeking. So we made a decision that for the time being, she would not participate in meals with her non-disabled peers because it was not good for her. You know, all kinds of different needs. So, but if your child is not participating, then a description should be given as to why, a justification as to why. Extended school year services. This is not summer school, and this is not LEAP remediation, and it is not enrichment. This is to make sure that over the summer, when we take our 2.5-month break, that when the kiddo comes back to school, we're not going to have to increase special education minutes to catch them up. So there are a lot of different ways kids can qualify for extended school year services, which is just a continuation of services that happen during the summer. Some districts do a beautiful job of doing this over the summer, and I highly recommend it if the program is really good. Some districts don't put as much money into their ESYS, and so I have literally had kids that have qualified for it, and the district said, you'll have 20 minutes 3 days a week. What? You know, if the parent is a working parent, maybe they can't get their kid to the school where it's being done for 20 minutes 3 days a week, and in that case, the parent has to refuse the service. We can have this if we think the kiddo is going to regress. If they are at a critical point of like they're right there, they just need just a little more practice. we can qualify a kid. We can qualify if they have health needs, and so they have had excessive absences due to their health needs. We can use this for employment. So for our high schoolers that are in an employment program at school and their teacher goes and supports them certain days of the week, we can do that over the summer. So lots of different ways we can qualify for ESYS services, but it's not mandatory. And if the parent does not want to participate, then they can waive that service. It's kind of one of those things where when it's good, it's really, really good, but when it's bad, it's terrible. Supports needed for school personnel. Many, if not most, districts have a phrase that is just copy and paste. The East Baton Rouge Parish template says there are no additional supports needed by personnel that would not be met through the use of district mandated collaboration, blah, blah, blah. So that is most often a copy paste box. All right, then we get to the services placement or minutes page. Very, very, very important to know how to use this. First is total instructional minutes in the day. The principal, the administrative team, they decide that. Once you know your minutes for the school, that's usually the minutes for the school year, unless, you know, we have a hurricane and then we add like 7 minutes to the day and things like that. How many days per week the student attends. Right. Then in our main box, the part all the way to the left says service, and this tells what the services are that's going to happen. Is it special education? Is it speech therapy? Is it adapted PE? So we're writing in there what the service is. The date to begin is most often the date of the IEP meeting, but for future planning, you might have additional dates. So if you have a split plan IEP, you might even use both boxes. The top box, say for middle school, I'm writing this like the kid is in 8th grade, it's February, I know they're going to high school in August. I'm going to plan with the high school team. And so my middle school stuff will go up here, and then my high school stuff will go down here. Other schools will use it for educational stuff here, and then related services here. Really kind of depends on your district. But the date to begin is typically the IEP date or the first day of the next school year. Duration is how long services will take place, and most typically 1 IEP year. Unless we know that the student, say, is going to have a life-altering surgery and something's going to change. And so then we don't need that service anymore. So that's most commonly just 1 IEP year. Group-individual, you could also write both in these. For example, kiddos that get speech therapy. Maybe 1 day a week, the speech therapist pulls the kid to work on one-on-one skills, articulation, language. And then the second time she sees that kid, she goes into the classroom to support social language. So that, then we would put both. Most times, special education instruction is group, unless your child gets one-on-one instruction, in which case it would be individual. All right, this is like the big thing to know. Regular class, community-based class, special class. This tells where the kid is going to receive those services. So if the kiddo is in regular class, but the special education teacher is going into the regular ed room, that's where we put these minutes. So it's minutes and then sessions per week. So 50 minutes a day, 5 days a week, 60 minutes a day, 5 days a week. Or if it's one of those weird A-B schedules, it can look, you know, different depending on what the schedule is. Our community classes, this is more for our older kiddos, upper middle school and high school that are going out into the community. They are working less on the academic cognitive skills and more on their functional and independent living skills. So maybe on Mondays, they go to the YMCA and they do things there. And then on Tuesdays, they go to a sheltered workstation. And then on Wednesdays, they do whatever. They go to the post office. Whatever it is they're doing, if the support is provided by a special education teacher in the community, those minutes go here. And then special classroom is exactly that. It's provided by the special education teacher in the special education classroom. A note, paraeducator minutes do not count as special education minutes. And we're going to talk about how to protect that paraeducator's minutes in just a few minutes. All right. I mentioned the second box, often used for split IEPs. Sometimes schools break it out a little differently. There's a comments box provided underneath that table of minutes. If your student has a paraeducator and they need that paraeducator to be successful and to stay in class and to access their curriculum, then you want to protect that time. If you do not protect that time, that paraeducator can and likely will be pulled for recess duty, to substitute for a teacher who had to leave, to do carpool, to run copies of something, to go to the school board office to deliver something, whatever it is. But if you protect your time by saying a paraeducator will accompany the student to science class every day for 50 minutes, then that's protected. That then becomes part of this legally binding document. So please, please, if your kid is dependent on a para for support, have that support protected. All right, last page. Site determination. So theoretically, all kids go to their neighborhood school. They go to the school that they would go to if they did not have an exceptionality. The class size, the chronological age is the same as your student. As a practical matter, however, that's not always how it happens. Every district has to provide the continuum of services in a continuum of settings, but not every single school has, say, a classroom for kids with autism. Not every single school has a program for kids who are emotionally disturbed, but it exists somewhere in the district. So if that is your student's case, then we will write in this site box that we have discussed these things, we have considered these things, but this other place is the site that is right for the child. Progress reports. This is not the progress reports that you think of when we think of when I was a kid, where you would get a report card, and then in the middle you get a progress report, and then you get a report card, and then progress report. This is not that. This is progress toward the IEP goals and objectives. So whatever your goals and objectives are, you should have data that comes home on your progress report that shows how your child is progressing towards achieving that goal. So if your goal was 80% accuracy on a list of words, then I should see data. I should see, okay, now we're at 43% accuracy. All right, now we're at 62% accuracy. If your progress report does not have data, I would send it back and I would ask for the data. Assessment implications. So for our kiddos who are going to be taking the Leap Connect test, we want to make sure that the parents understand the ramifications of that. So testing in Leap Connect means that the child might earn a high school diploma if they meet the requirements for the alternative pathway. Otherwise, they will receive a certificate of achievement. But we don't want to wait until the last minute and spring that on the parents, and then the parents are like, wait, what? We want to make sure that this is a conversation that's being had all throughout this child's educational journey. Age of majority, so at least 1 year before 18, the child has to be informed of their rights, and that the rights will transfer to that kid unless the parent is going through the legal channels to remain in guardianship. So meaning that the parent will be in control of their child's legal matters. All right, consent for services. So this first box says that you have received a copy of the rights booklet, and you have been given an opportunity for an explanation of that. These boxes should not be pre-checked. This should be something that is checked when you are at the meeting, and yes, you can verbally say, I have received a copy of this rights booklet. I know by the time our kids get into 5th, 6th, and up grade, you probably have seen enough rights booklets to be able to wallpaper your bathroom with them. The teacher still has to give it to you every year. Mandy?
If I raised my hand, I didn't mean to. I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry.
You're good.
All right, our next tiny box is initial consent. So just last week, we talked about the school having to have that consent for the initial evaluation. They also have to have consent for the initial provision of special education and related services. So for that very first time, the parent has to give consent. Every time after that, the school we can still provide special education and related services. And if we don't agree with the services, that's a whole nother, that's a lesson like week 4. Dispute resolution, that's what we'll talk about. I think it's week 4. So if you do not agree with what has happened in your child's meeting, you do not agree with what is in the IEP, you do not have to just suck it up and take it on the chin. You can pursue a solution to your complaint. The state has a whole chart on how to do this, and we will go over it in a future meeting. And then the last little box is the parent or student did not attend the review IEP meeting. Review meaning the annual, so the one that we're reviewing each year when it comes due. All right, all of these things are supporting documentation. Not every kid will have every one of them because it's not applicable. So not every kid has a healthcare plan or consent for Medicaid billing or an individual graduation plan for LEAP Connect students. But for the students who have those things, we will check the box yes, and we will connect that document to this IEP. All right, this is the big signing box. This is the box that when people tell you, you don't have to sign the IEP, this is what they're talking about. That first page, you sign just saying, I am present. This page, you're signing that you're agreeing with this. You only have to sign the initial. If you don't sign the initial, services may not begin. But once you've had a few and this is not the initial anymore, you don't have to sign it. You can be allowed up to 5 days to take it home, review it, make your decision. If you still do not want to sign it, what should happen is that services continue to be given as written in the IEP prior to this one that is in contention. And then the school should work with you to come up with a compromise on what you're going to do. Sometimes parents don't sign and the school's like, okay, and they just carry on and they just do the IEP. But what should happen is that you should work together to come up with a solution. If you cannot, then you go to the dispute resolution chart. And again, we'll go over that in, I think, week 4. So the parent signs it, and then underneath the ODR signs it. That's the officially designated representative of the school. So most often the principal. It's not the principal, it'd be the assistant principal, the dean, guidance counselor, whoever they are told. Jamie says, I know I'm a little late, but regarding ESY, I was told my son wasn't eligible because it was only for students with truancy issues or who were failing, which is definitely false. Like we mentioned, there are lots of ways that kids can qualify. On the form, there are 5, 6, 7, 8 different ways a kid can qualify. So that might be where they are putting their eggs into that basket. They could be right about summer school being for truancy or kids who are failing, but definitely not for our kids with special needs. ESY is something completely different. I don't know where your district is, but like I mentioned before, some districts, ESY, it's not even worth the paper that it's written on. But other districts do a good job, so. An IEP is a legally binding document. It has to be followed as written. So if you think your child is not being followed, you may absolutely ask for the documentation logs for accountability purposes. A teacher cannot take away like the calculator because they think the kid doesn't need it anymore. That is not a decision that a teacher can make on their own. All school districts have their own policies and procedures for writing IEPs. Some things are not best practice, like those copy-paste objectives, not best practice. Don't feel like you just have to take it on the chin and accept it. It is absolutely okay to question. It's okay to ask for clarification. It is even okay to pass your notebook across the table and say, can you please write that down so I can look it up later? That's a pretty good way to get them to compromise quickly on something that you're asking for. All right, y'all, that was an hour and 36 minutes of IEP boot camp. I'm sure your brains are tired. My voice is tired. But if you guys have any questions, I would be happy to answer those for you. All right. Failing any questions, week 3 is next week. So we will be talking about whatever's next in our series, which off the top of my head, I cannot remember. But I guarantee you it has something to do with the IEP. You will all get an email invitation to this virtual session next week at the beginning of the week with the materials attached. And if you guys are ever in Baton Rouge and would like to join the in-person session, those are 11:30 also on Wednesdays.